Chapter 31, I Deliver a Love Note, Sadie. I'm glad Carter told me that last bit, partly because I was unconscious when it happened, partly because I can't talk about what Boss did without going to pieces. But more on that later. I woke feeling as if someone had overinflated my head. My eyes weren't seeing the same things. Out of my left, I saw a baboon bum. Out of my right, my long-lost Uncle Amos. Naturally, I decided to focus on the right. Amos? He laid a cool cloth on my forehead. Rest, child, you had quite a concussion. That, at least, I could believe. As my eyes began to focus, I saw we were outside under a starry night sky. I was lying on a blanket on what felt like soft sand. Khufu stood next to me. His colorful side was a bit too close to my face. He was stirring a pot over a small fire, and whatever he was cooking smelled like burning tar. Carter sat nearby at the top of a sand dune, looking despondent and holding... Was that Muffin in his lap? Amos appeared much as he had when we last saw him, ages ago. He wore his blue suit with matching coat and fedora. His long hair was neatly braided, and his round glasses glinted in the sun. He appeared fresh and rested, not like someone who had been set a prisoner of Set. How did you get away from Set? His expression darkened. I was a fool to go looking for him, Sadie. I had no idea how powerful he'd become. His spirit is tied to the Red Pyramid. So, he doesn't have a human host? Amos shook his head. He doesn't need one as long as he has a pyramid. As it gets closer to completion, he gets stronger and stronger. I sneaked into his lair under the mountain and walked right into a trap. I'm ashamed to say he took me without a fight. He gestured at his suit, showing off how perfectly fine he was. Not a scratch, just bam, I was frozen like a statue. Set stood me outside his pyramid like a trophy and let the demons laugh and mock me as they passed by. Did you see Dad? I asked. His shoulders slumped. I heard the demons talking. The coffin is inside the pyramid. They're planning to use Osiris's power to augment the storm. When Set unleashes it at sunrise, and it will be quite an explosion, Osiris and your father will be obliterated. Osiris will be exiled so deep into the Duat that he may never rise again. My head began to throb. I couldn't believe we had so little time, and if Amos couldn't save Dad, how could Carter and I? But you got away, I said, grasping for any good news, so there must be weaknesses in his defense. The magic that froze me eventually began to weaken. I concentrated my energy and worked my way out of the binding. It took many hours, but finally I broke free. I sneaked out at midday when the demons were sleeping. It was much too easy. It doesn't sound good, I said. Amos shook his head, obviously troubled. Set allowed me to escape. I don't know why, but I shouldn't be alive. It's a trick of some sort, I'm afraid. Whatever he was going to say, he changed his mind. At any rate, my first thought was to find you, so I summoned my boat. He gestured behind him. I managed to lift my head and saw that we were in a strange desert of white dunes that stretched as far as I could see in the starlight. The sand under my fingers was so fine and white it might have been sugar. Amos's boat, the same boat that had carried us from the Thames to Brooklyn, was beached at the top of a nearby dune, canted at a precarious angle as if it had been thrown there. There's a supply locker aboard, Amos offered, if you'd like fresh clothes. But where are we? White Sands, Carter told me, in New Mexico. It's a government range for testing missiles. Amos said no one would look for us here, so we gave you some time to heal. It's about 7 in the evening, still the 28th. 12 hours or so until, you know. But too many questions swam around in my mind. The last thing I remembered, I'd been at the river talking to Nephthys. Her voice had seemed to come from the other side of the world. She'd spoken faintly through the current, so hard to understand yet quite insistent. She told me she was sheltered far away in a sleeping host, which I couldn't make sense of. She'd said she could not appear in person, but that she would send a message. Then the water had started to boil. We were attacked. Carter stroked Muffin's head, and I finally noticed the amulet. Boss's amulet was missing. Sadie, I've got some bad news. He told me what had happened, and I closed my eyes. I started to weep. Embarrassing, yes, but I couldn't help it. Over the last few days, I'd lost everything. My home, my ordinary life, my father. I'd been almost killed half a dozen times. My mother's death, which I'd never gotten over to begin with, hurt like a reopened wound, and now Boss was gone too? When Anubis had questioned me in the underworld, he'd wanted to know what I would sacrifice to save the world. What haven't I sacrificed already, I wanted to scream. What have I got left? Carter came over and gave me Muffin, who purred in my arms, but it wasn't the same, it wasn't Boss. She'll come back, won't she? I looked at Amos imploringly. I mean, she's immortal, isn't she? Amos tugged at the rim of his hat. Sadie, I just don't know. It seems she sacrificed herself to defeat Sobek. Boss forced him back to the Duat at the expense of her own life. She even spared Muffin, her host, probably with the last shred of her power. If that's true, it would be very difficult for Boss to come back. Perhaps someday, in a few hundred years. No, not a few hundred years. I can't. My voice broke. Carter put his hand on my shoulders, and I knew he understood. We couldn't lose someone else. We just couldn't. Rest now, Amos said. We can spare another hour, but then we'll have to get moving. Khufu offered me a bowl of his concoction. The chunky liquid looked like soup that had died long ago. I glanced at Amos, hoping he would give me a pass, but he nodded encouragingly. Just my luck. On top of everything else, I had to take baboon medicine. I sipped the brew, which tasted almost as bad as it smelled, and immediately my eyelids felt heavy. I closed my eyes and slept. And just when I thought I had this soul leaving the body business sorted, my soul decided to break the rules. Well, it is my soul after all, so I suppose that makes sense. As my ball left my body, it kept its human form, which was better than the winged poultry look, but it kept growing and growing until I towered above White Sands. I've been told many times that I have a lot of spirit, usually not as a compliment, but this was absurd. My ba was as tall as the Washington Monument. To the south, past miles and miles of desert, steam rose from the Rio Grande, the battle site where Boston Sobek had perished. Even as tall as I was, I shouldn't have been able to see all the way to Texas, especially at night, but somehow I could. To the north, even farther away, I saw a distant red glow, and I knew it was the RF Set. His power was growing as his pyramid neared completion. I looked down. Next to my foot was a tiny cluster of specks, our camp. Miniature Carter, Amos, and Khufu sat talking around the cooking fire. Amos's boat was no longer than my toe. My own sleeping form lay curled in a blanket, so small I could have crushed myself with one misstep. I was enormous, and the world was small. That's how gods see things, a voice told me. I looked around but saw nothing, just the vast expanse of rolling white dunes. Then, in front of me, the dunes shifted. I thought it was the wind until an entire dune rolled away sideways like a wave. Another moved in another, and I realized I was looking at a human form, an enormous man lying in the fetal position. He got up, shaking white sand everywhere. I knelt down and cupped my hands over my companions to keep them from getting buried. Oddly, they didn't seem to notice, as if the disruption were no more than a sprinkle of rain. The man rose to his full height, at least a head taller than my own giant form. His body was made of sand that curtained off his arms and chest like waterfalls of sugar. The sand shifted across his face until he formed a vague smile. "Sadie Kane," he said, "I've been waiting for you." Geb. Don't ask me how I knew, but instantly I knew this was the god of the earth. Maybe the sand body was a giveaway. "I have something for you." It didn't make sense that my ba would have an envelope, but I reached into my shimmering, ghostly pocket and pulled out the note from Nut. "Your wife misses you," I said. Geb took the note gingerly. He held it to his face and seemed to sniff it. Then he opened the envelope. Instead of a letter, fireworks burst out. A new constellation blazed in the night sky above us, the face of Nut, formed by 1,000 stars. The wind rose quickly and ripped the image apart, but Geb sighed contentedly. He closed the envelope and tucked it inside his sandy chest as if it were a pocket right there where his heart should be. "I owe you thanks, Sadie Kane," Geb said. "It has been many millennia since I saw the face of my beloved. Ask me a favor that the earth can grant, and it shall be yours." "Save my father," I said immediately. Geb's face rippled with surprise. What a loyal daughter. Isis could learn a thing from you." "Alas, I cannot. Your father's path is twined with that of Osiris, and matters between the gods cannot be solved by the earth." "Then I don't suppose you could collapse Set's mountain and destroy his pyramid?" I asked. Geb's laughter was like the world's largest sand shaker. "I cannot intervene so directly between my children. Set is my son too." I almost stamped my foot in frustration. Then I remembered I was a giant and might smash the whole camp. Could a ba do that? Better not find out. "Well, your favors aren't very useful then." Geb shrugged, sloughing off a few tons of sand from his shoulders. "Perhaps some advice to help you achieve what you desire. Go to the place of the crosses." "And where is that?" "Close," he promised. "And Sadie Kane, you were right. You have lost too much. Your family has suffered. I know what that is like. Just remember, a parent would do anything to save his children. I gave up my happiness, my wife. I took on the curse of Ra so that my children could be born." He looked up at the sky wistfully. "And while I miss my beloved more each millennia, I know neither of us would change our choice. I have 5 children whom I love." "Even Set?" I said incredulously. "He's about to destroy millions of people." "Set is more than he appears," Geb said. "He is our flesh and blood." "Not mine." "No?" Geb shifted, lowering himself. I thought he was crouching until I realized he was melting into the dunes. "Think on it, Sadie Kane, and proceed with care. Danger awaits you at the place of the crosses, but you will also find what you need." "Could you be a little more vague?" I grumbled. But Geb was gone, leaving only a taller than normal dune in the sands, and my boss sank back into my body.